Welcome to the best of first-person episodes from Phantoms and Monsters. Please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of all future uploads.
Living in the heart of Bigfoot country. It was in the summer of '64 that my life would make an abrupt change forever. I would forever leave my childhood behind at 6 years old and meet strange new people and creatures that would touch my life. That summer I was 6 years old, being born March 5, 1958 in Fairview, Oklahoma. Fairview was a small southern town made up of Russian immigrants and ex-German prisoners of war. It was a safe place where a kid could play and be friends with the whole town. My dad had another life that he kept hidden from everyone, including my mother. He was the average type of father and husband until Fridays came around. Then he would be gone until Monday, and pretending to have been on a fishing or hunting trip. From the airline tags attached to his suitcases, we all knew it wasn't the truth. My dad was Melvin Leroy Shamblin, and my mother's maiden name was Wanda Mae Simpson. One day while me and my brother Merle were playing with our next-door neighbor Pamela Cohn in the backyard, two men in hats and dark sunglasses walked up and carried me and my brother away. They locked us up in a cellar in the country. When my dad paid the ransom to the mobsters, they gave directions to where me and Merle were stashed. Instead of letting the mobsters go, they received a little vigilante justice. Dad and the local businessmen from around Fairview decided the mobsters' fate. They put them in an old electric chair that was on display at an insurance agency and fried them. My uncle John Warren Shamblin had taken me and Merle to the car, so we wouldn't see the execution. Some of these men had been Nazi war prisoners, and the Nazis were tough on crime. In a few weeks Dad moved us to a farm 5 miles northeast of Colony, Oklahoma. My great-grandpa James Shamblin had built it many years earlier, when he was in the brick business, hiring the local Indians. At first I hated it, until Dad explained that living here would keep us safe from his business enemies. The house didn't have running water, telephone service, or electricity. Mother and my big sisters would cry almost every day we lived here. It was hard work pumping water for bathes, washing, and the garden. That summer the wind seldom blowed, so we spent hours pumping water, because the windmill didn't turn very often. In July a small tornado carried me and the outhouse into the sky and deposited me into the road. Thank heaven the outhouse had a wooden floor and a strong latch. I was unharmed. This is when I first began roaming the countryside and exploring. We had many relatives in the Colony area, and Tarzan was the television show that I loved the most. At the time, we couldn't watch television at our house because of the lack of electricity. I started school here and had a great teacher named Mrs. Rissinger. She taught the first and second grades in the same classroom. Later, when I was in the 5th grade, Colony and Corn schools consolidated and became Washita Heights. Our school was leased from the Indian tribe. It was part of Seeger's Indian School. Here was the ideal educational and industrial school where children of the forest and the plains, who were strangers to civilized life, whose parents knew nothing but the chase and the warpath, and who had no conception of farming and industry, were taught to be useful, self-supporting members of society. The work was done by the students who were given a share in all crops grown. The farming was planned, and all work was done under the supervision of John H. Seeger. Riding the school bus was terrible because the high school boys would fist the little kids in the back and twist our arms. So each day I dreaded going to school. But just as soon as the school bus dumped me off, I would run across the peanut field while stripping off my clothes, so I could become Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle. I would pretend the fields and pastures were Africa. Gradually our bikes and toys become missing. Mother blamed it on the retarded Yui brother named Edmund who lived between us and Ghost Mound. His brother Alfred was his guardian and worked for the city of Weatherford. Neither one ever married, yet always managed to be happy. One day I went walking down the road looking for my bike and army toys, and something big and hairy ran across the road. I didn't know what it was, yet it scared me lots at the time. So I quit wandering around after dark. A few weeks later something began pulling parts from our chickens. Dad thought it might be an enemy sending us threats, so he moved us a year later to a house that was 1.5 miles north of Colony. Dad taught us to always be aware of what was around us. Never walk any place looking at the street or road. I was sure happy to live once again in a house filled with modern conveniences. Now that I was 7 years old, Dad began dumping ever more responsibilities on me. Each morning I had to feed the livestock and work in the fields for 8 hours, along with my sisters Malva Faye and LaDonna Gale. When I was 8 I was expected to move irrigation pipe, along with my sisters, and then work 10 hours in the fields. At the end of a hard day, there were always the heavy irrigation pipes to move across the peanuts and cotton. Me and my brother got to sleep in the upstairs part of the house. There were some of the famous Nazi old uniforms hanging in the closet, 2 pairs of his boots, his engraved rifles and swords, and a chest full of his personal effects. Mother wasn't sure if they belonged to Dad or Buell Astley, the house's former resident. One of the 2 moms said probably brought them back from Germany as war souvenirs. My dad's military record showed he got to watch as the first atom bomb was exploded in New Mexico July 1945, while he watched in the distance. He was one of the few survivors. I took the papers to school for show and tell, and the principal alerted the army. They came to school and took the classified papers. Said they had sent them to Dad by mistake. Now all his records have been sealed permanently. So as a kid I wondered if this famous German had maybe survived and was living in America. Mom cleared the German stuff from our room after about 2 weeks. When I was 11, me and my brother found 47 sheets of gold coins. Under each was a description in a language we could not read. There were about 20 coins on each sheet. Whoever brought the Nazi stuff probably stole these coins from a museum or a millionaire's collection in Europe. When we showed Dad the coins, he zipped out the door with them and said he was returning them to Buell Astley, the rightful owner. Me and my brother kept 1 sheet for ourselves and buried them in the backyard after making a treasure map. When we moved from there in '69, me and my brother couldn't find the coins. Of course we didn't have a metal detector because I was only 11 years old. My great-grandpa was the first white man to settle in western Oklahoma among the Indians. I was 7 years old when I joined Cub Scouts in Colony, Oklahoma. Our den masters were Herschel and Glenn Rhodes plus Clifford Payne. They took turns having the meetings in their homes. Jack McClummer was in charge of the much older Boy Scouts. A year later the Cub and Boy Scouts had a joint camping trip to Payne's Lake. We all had a great time until bedtime rolled around. Since there were twice as many Boy Scouts as Cub Scouts, they decided to put each Cub Scout in a tent with 2 Boy Scouts. I was having none of this because big boys beat me up on the school bus every day. So as the rest of the Scouts went to sleep, I wandered around the lake. Clifford Payne stayed up and fed the campfire. He kept a watchful eye on me and my flashlight. Every hour or so he yelled at me to go to bed. Before long he jumped in his pickup and went for my dad. So angry his wheels were spinning in the deep sand. Clifford died in his 40s because acting as a deputy sheriff, he entered a drug dealer's house in the middle of the night and got shot. He should have identified himself as law enforcement. After he left, I felt it safe to climb Twin Mound, which is located beside the lake. It was easy because there was a full moon. As I was scanning the lake and pastures around me, I noticed movement near the lake's drain below the dam. It looked as if 2 tall bears were noodling catfish from under the stream's banks. After a while I hurried to the road as Dad's pickup pulled up. He scolded me and said I could sleep in the truck that night. When I got back to camp, Clifford insisted that Dad use his belt on me for being a spoiled baby. Dad got shamed and beat me so bad, I had welts on me for a week. Said no Shamblin in history ever showed any fear, and I was a miserable little coward. From that day forward I fought vigorously anyone who hurt me, no matter how big or old they were. Never wanting my dad to feel ashamed of them. That's how I got my nickname Rooster, ready to swing my fist at a moment's notice. And to fight long and hard until there was nothing left in me. Riley was so furious because he thought I made the bear story up, to cover up for not minding him. The next week I went to the encyclopedia and found our bears only live in forests. Trees are in short supply in western Oklahoma. Windbreaks or shelterbolts were planted in a variety of settings, such as on cropland, pasture, and rangeland, along roads, farmsteads, feedlots, and in urban areas. They were established to protect or shelter nearby areas from troublesome winds. They were put in after the Dust Bowl and trees growing around lakes, creeks, and rivers, and that's about all. This was my first Bigfoot sighting, unknown to me at the time. I called them bears, like the ones I had seen at the Oklahoma City Zoo. The hairy animal that crossed the road when I was 6, most likely was a Bigfoot. It also probably stole our toys and hurt our chickens. The next year when I was 9 years old my mother hosted a family reunion. After just about everyone had gone home, me and my cousin Cheryl Renee Goss continued to play under the huge native elm tree, which was about a quarter-mile north of the house. I was the first one to notice the bear-looking animals running towards us from the west. They probably had been dining on prairie dogs, just over the hill I figured, because there was a bunch of them. I didn't scream bears or my cousin would not have moved, just begin arguing with me, since she knew bears weren't in these parts. So I yelled pack of wild dogs at the top of my lungs. This sent Renee racing up the tree, and me following behind, just to make certain she climbed high enough and out of reach. As the bears came running at high speed under the tree, I covered Renee's mouth and eyes to shut her up, or else they would know our location in the heavily leafed tree. Because of the tree branches, I couldn't get a good look at the bears who ran on two legs beneath us. After they crossed the road, they began eating on Richard Humberger's peanut vines, and later went into his creek. Renee was crying hysterical as we walked back to the house, and soon both my big sisters came running to see what was the matter. When I was 9, Dad's mobster friends began hanging around, trying to catch a few words with him. My dad was really rude and seldom said a word to the mobsters. Mom ignored them entirely. It was awkward watching television in silence with people who had come so far to do business, knowing they were going to be disappointed. So I decided to entertain them when they came knocking. I took them fishing at Worth Richmond's lake about a half-mile north of us, and a quarter-mile east. The men seemed to enjoy our fishing, and I enjoyed hearing about faraway places like Chicago, New York City, Boston, Houston, Moscow, London, Paris, and Berlin. They were ever so anxious to take part in my dad's business enterprises. However, Dad didn't want any more business partners, he said. Dad made contracts with companies to deliver goods. The goods never got delivered, and he would split the money with top management. I figured this out from reading Dad's mail. He also forced people to sell him their mineral rights, refineries to buy stolen crude oil, and ranchers to sell him their cattle and tractors for cents on the dollar. At one point, Dad had over 200 oil wells. Some of the locals got to calling him J.R. Ewing, like the TV show Dallas. Ever since I was small, I raised many breeds of chickens and sold hatching eggs. My goal has always been to save the rare breeds from extinction. Dad only cared about his fighting chickens, which he fought in countries throughout the world. I was in charge of the breeding program for all of the chickens. It was a huge responsibility because Dad wagered a huge amount of money on them. He sold his brood cocks for $10,000 minus $25,000. And the battle stags sold for $2,500, $4,000. Over the years I got better at selecting breeding stock, and our roosters almost never lost in the gaff. In the long knife look plays a large role, so the better rooster can lose, because the weapons are so lethal. Dad fought lots of mains for between $1 and $5 million. I never attended the fights because Dad didn't want me taking up gambling. We moved to the Ghost Mound area when I started the 6th grade. Men who became business partners with my dad soon became broke. So they began mailing threatening letters to the house. Mom and Dad felt the move was the safest thing to do. Besides, my family had plans to take over horse racing and pro sports, both of which would have a big impact on gambling, if you knew who was going to win. My mother's parents, Melvin and Alta Simpson, were mostly into importing cocaine from Colombia and heroin from Karachi, Pakistan by the tons. Alta sponsored these poor kids through church organizations. When they became old enough, she turned them into mules around the world. Both sides of my family were heavily into organized crime. I think on the Harian side of the family in Corsica, they have been crooks for generations. Me and my siblings could all read and write by the time we were 5 years old. We all represented our schools in competitions. Starting school at Hydro in the 6th grade was okay. None of the high school boys on the school bus wanted to fight the younger boys. Had a great teacher, Mrs. Opal Hargrove. Besides schoolwork, she had us growing plants and making ceramics. My dad tried his best so that we kept a low profile, so nobody would report him to the feds. In the 7th grade, he quit letting mobster associates visit. We were required to attend church every Sunday and Wednesday, so we wouldn't turn out like my dad. However, many people in the area still knew about my dad's wicked ways. Many Sundays we had to hear the sermons about my dad's sinful ways. It was in 1970 that I learned about my dad's other marriages from a friend at school. Seems he had 5 wives prior to my mother, and never messed with divorcing any of them. He was 30 and mother 19 when they married. I kept the information secret from mother until Dad died in 1999 from lung cancer. Living 1/2 mile east and a half mile north from Ghost Mound was a blast. Each day nearly me and my brother would climb it and look over the countryside. Sometimes we would see the bears walking upright across the cotton and peanut fields. This didn't keep me from playing Tarzan and running nude along the creek's fields and pastures. Animals got to know me from my roaming and leaving food for them. Each day I chopped up 5 gallons of fruits, vegetables and meat, and scattered them along my paths. Soon some of the animals began following me, and I felt just like Tarzan. I carried a long spear as I ran, just in case any mean coward wanted to chase me. Near Thanksgiving of 1970, when I was 12 years old, me and my brother just go off the Hydro school bus and was putting our school books away, when through the front door a man walked in carrying a pistol. He told me and my brother to get into the deep freeze. It was a new one, Mother had just began to use, so there was plenty of room in the chest freezer. The keys were still in the lock. Guess who wanted to have my parents discover 2 frozen sons? We tried very hard to break the lock using our legs and back. When we ran out of oxygen, we took breaths through the drainage hole, which I cleared by pushing the pencil I found in my pocket through. Eventually the lock broke, and we escaped. That was the second time we had almost been killed by Dad's enemies. I prayed he would quit cheating people. Rex Bottom told my mother that I had been running the creeks like a wild boy, not even wearing any clothes. I thought I was careful not to be seen by the neighbors. So August 1970, my days of pretending to be Tarzan ended with shame. Dad made me and my sisters practice using the guns every Tuesday night. He was always afraid somebody would harm us while he was away on weekends.
This is Lon Strickler. If you like this program, it would help us if you would give it a thumbs up. Then subscribe and click the bell icon so you get notification when we upload new first-person encounters. We have many more to come very soon. And by the way, if you have a suggestion or an experience of your own, please leave a comment.